Hello everyone and welcome to Rad Chat. My name is Namanjot Ganson and I'm joined by fellow host Joe McNamara.
Hi everyone.
So we're at UKIO conference and we've got a physicist here to talk to you. Would you like to introduce yourself please?
Yeah, I'm Maryam. I am a radiotherapy physicist and I'm talking about the huge gender data gap and the worst outcomes for the female population, which is of course half of the world.
So have you come specifically to UKIO to kind of present?
Yes, I had an e-poster on gender-specific radiotherapy, looking at the different radiosensitivities between male and female. And I was just astonished that this has never been talked about, hasn't been taught. And when I first came across it, I just had to walk around.
You had to walk around.
Yes.
Are you a feminist? Would you call yourself a feminist?
No, I was just very taken aback by the huge deficit of medical information on female, that it's like doesn't exist, largely because women haven't been studied.
Right.
And then when I looked at this, I found more and more, and I saw that even today in clinical trials, it's still going on. And also with radiation doses, like it hasn't been taught that female are more radiosensitive and they have worse outcomes.
So are females more radiosensitive?
Yes, and there is data from the A-bomb survivors of 1945 and from Chernobyl 1986, and we have data from that. There was a rare 2006-2007 study, from like the information came from that women had more effects, often twice the toxicity, and that this went across the whole age spectrum. This is like from children to adulthood, old age. So it's across, and I just surprised how that was never said or inputted into dosages. And then when I looked at dosages, I saw that it's like what we use currently is over 70 years old in terms of the current prescribing. It's a one-size-fits-all, so it assumes uniform radiosensitivity and
was that
homogeneous biology.
And so when they obviously designed dose fractionation regimes, is that always based on males? Like, where has that data come from specifically?
The data for radiation came from the 1920s and 30s. It was done on rabbits and rams, and they saw that when they gave radiation to a ram, that if they fractionated, that the ram would avoid the skin burn. So that's why fractionation came into being. And then in the 50s and 60s, radiation was it was just that it continued in that it was a one size fits all. So it applied to men and women. It's just that the assumptions of everyone has uniform radiosensitivity and the biology is homogeneous. So, like even today, when you plan treatments, it's made sure that there's a uniform distribution of the dose. But when in fact we know that the tumor is heterogeneous, it's evolving all the time.
I'm still a bit baffled. So, everything seems to be potentially based on male anatomy or physiology. Yeah. But I mean, even car crash dummies, everything, airbags, it's all based on men as the crash dummies, so the same weight, build. There's a book I'm reading, I keep talking about this on podcasts, but Invisible Women, It's exactly this.
I saw that, yeah.
It's a great book, but I just I'm only 30% through. But every time I read some of the stats, it's just mind blowing. Like in an office, the air temperature is based on men, so physiologically women will be colder, but they'll have blankets in the office. But it just adds to this that actually the gender gap is not just about money. It's actually such a big gap on just normal lifestyle, physiological differences.
Yeah, because the DNA is different and also the hormones. So this has a huge factor. And we see it across with drugs that women as a whole have doubled the toxicity, and in 2001, 8 out of 10 drugs were taken off the market because they were too toxic for women. And the thing is with these drugs, huge money is gone into them in the preclinical. It's all done on male mice, and then you have it's tested on males, and then afterward, when all the regulation is done and it's brought to market, then it's put out on women, and women are affected, and that comes after all that huge injection of money.
You've literally blown my mind. Like, I know this is what Rad Chat is about, especially at conferences where we get anyone coming in the podcast. But seriously, so this, in terms of kind of the impact that research like this could potentially have, is around the genomics, isn't it? Of how potentially we could personalise dose and fractionations, but specifically to that person and that physiology. Is that kind of what you anticipate to happen in the future?
Yeah, and this is because, like, if our current models are over 70 years old, they seriously need to be updated, and to incorporate that the tumour is heterogeneous, and also the radiosensitivity factors. So, and definitely incorporating all the genomic data, that's how radiotherapy is going to be. It's not going to be that one size fits all approach.
Do you think that's where AI is going to come in?
Yeah, that will definitely help, because with the data mining, there's like programs like Spot the Differences, so that will definitely speed things up.
But what if the AI is biased in the first place?
Exactly.
Because it is.
We've seen
but
that,
it is. We know it is. Yeah, it's built by
Yeah.
white middle-class people, mainly men. The tech world, again, Invisible Women talks about it. You don't get women in tech.
Yeah.
But you should do, because actually for a gender, that's how things will improve. But AI might be biased as well.
Exactly. There is an unconscious bias there. The awareness, people are not, it's still not existing in terms of, people being awake to this. It is a huge factor. And I think the biggest thing, the root of all the data we have, the guidelines, is from clinical trials. Right now, the trials have unequal and insufficient sample sizes of female sex. And not just that, when the trials are often pooled, or the gender differential is removed from the data. Now, this is largely due to funding. And what that does, when you pool the results or remove the gender, that leads to male-biased or genderless studies. So all the information, any information on females is lost. So when women, or any female, young, old, asks questions, goes to A&E, the data isn't there. Females haven't been studied, like with the heart attacks. The number one killer of women is heart attacks. And when they go to A&E and they present with symptoms, they have different heart attack symptoms than men. It's more kind of feeling unwell or nausea, while men have the classical kind of stab, in the heart pain. But doctors are trained on the male symptoms.
You are honestly, you're literally. I'm here, absolutely gobsmacked. I never knew that.
Yeah,
I never knew that.
Yeah. And I wish also with breast cancer survivors, they were told, they were told, like, the number one killer of women is heart attacks. It should be out there. Yeah. And then the double whammy is that when they have symptoms, doctors haven't been trained to recognize female heart attacks. So their outcomes, as you can imagine, are much worse. It is shocking. It is.
What got you interested in this? Because as a physicist, I wouldn't necessarily have thought this was something that you see in your day-to-day job, that you think, oh, let me just have a look at some research.
It was when I read this book. It was about dementia, and women have twice the amount of dementia than men. And I was really surprised by this. And then also when there was a piece in the book which mentioned about clinical trials and how they pool the data or remove the gender differentials. And because of that, we don't have information on the female population. And then the guidelines that are done are based on the outcomes from these clinical trials, and that's what doctors use. So so these guidelines are less accurate, and I just found it astounding because in physics, everything is percentages and we'll measure to this, and then you have this 50% error in your data. In terms of you have half the information gone, and which could be significant. And this feeds through, in terms of the guidelines and the dosages. And then right now you have in radiotherapy, the delivery is physically accurate, but the biology is imprecise. So we have personalization in terms of the dose shape, in shaping around the tumor. But we don't have in terms of we don't have it in terms of the data from in terms of dosages. Because another thing is the guidelines are based on population group data. So then we have that affects the BMI and that affects effective dose. So if that isn't correct, that's your dosages are not as inaccurate. And then you have your sex average organ tissue weighting factors. So how are you going to guide doses if you don't have the male female information? So that's why I was that's why the guidelines needs to be changed, for the era of personalized medicine. The guidelines need to be based on sex, age, hormonal status, and race. And then we need sex stratified organ tissue weighting factors, because that will become the dosing and the guidelines.
Just a small ask then.
Yeah.
I feel like it's quite a big thing, and obviously you're talking about it here at UKIO, but mind blown. Sounds like we have a lot to do.
Yeah, and I'm just surprised because huge work went to clinical trials, huge money, huge funding.
But it goes into clinical trials, doesn't go into the diversity within clinical trials.
Yeah. So this where there is the solution is with the trials that those results need to be stratified by sex and hormonal environment. So again, the whole thing with gender as well. So it goes according to your DNA and your hormonal status, because that affects. And then with the trials having equal large sample sizes of each sex. There was one shocking thing. I remember one
more shocking thing.
One lady researcher in American University in 1976 was doing some preclinical studies on mice, and she gave the same sleeping dose to she got some female mice and male mice, and the standard dose to put them to sleep, which was normally fine for male mice, killed the female mice. And then to this day, she just that just put her on the track of how come things were like this. And you saw it in that book as well in 2012 with the Ambien and the drug, and the FDA had to half the dose for women because of the car crashes. The insurance companies were saying, why are women having more car crashes? And they had more claims. So obviously, then they wanted it looked into. So the FDA had to half the dose because the drug Ambien is metabolized much slower in women. Like with alcohol, you see,
Yeah.
that's why you give different dosages. You see it. So it works the same in drugs and also radiation. Women just have, so if you apply what's precise for men, because at the moment it's personalized for men, it's less accurate for women, and then the outcomes are worse, often double. So I'm just really surprised, and not just that, I'm just really saddened when women go to doctors and they come in with more severe side effects, and they'll be dismissed, or it's in their imagination, or they'll be misdiagnosed, mismanaged, and I think that is really heartbreaking.
As someone who went through 5 years to get endometriosis diagnosed, routine appointments, and I actually had a doctor saying, I really don't think the pain is that bad. And for a clinician to say that to someone when I am crying in pain, not being listened to, and them not willing to refer for the diagnostic test, I can absolutely empathise with the fact that does happen in practice, unfortunately.
Yeah, it goes back to the medical school
the
training, and that the syllabus is a male it's male biased syllabus. And there is no study of sex differences in medicine, and that's why when you go to a doctor, they don't have the information. And they don't have evidence. They don't have data. Because there's no data on women. And I just like when I saw that in that book I read, I was just like, oh well, what about radiation? Does that look like radiation?
Amazing.
Then I googled
your
that.
inquisitive mind is amazing.
Then
I love it.
Googled radiation, and yes, it was all there from the atomic bombs of Japan. And another thing I came across in the 2011 in Fukushima, Japan, there was a tsunami which led to a nuclear disaster in the power plant. And this is 2011, and people in Japan wanted data individual to them, like they were in terms of what was the risk of their exposure to this nuclear incident. And what they had was population-based data. So say if a 20-year-old female says, okay, I was exposed in 2011, and the population data gives me a 20 millisievert estimate based, when in fact if they accounted for her age and her sex, she would be possibly liable to be in 100 millisievert in terms of exposure, because 2 gray doesn't mean 2 gray for all. It can be over or under. It just means if there was personalized dose index or a long-term index, then it could be that she could go like to the rest of her life in a balanced fashion and go for tests and be aware. Like this is the key thing that came out from all the patient data. Just awareness of being told, just to have the data there, because I know not everyone will have all the data, but for someone to join all the dots and put the data together, like in an app, like an evidence-based app, so that all the information from the sources is joined up, because we're still in the siloed medicine. Everything is isolated, things are isolated from each other. So I think, with the technology, everything should be much more joined and much more holistic approach. So with Japan, that's going to change. It has to go from population-based to individual.
So you're giving a talk at IPEM, is it? Is that today or tomorrow? So tomorrow. So if you're listening to this podcast episode, then definitely please check out the IPEM stand, because like you'll probably be blown away by some of this data. And have you got a poster as well that's on display?
Yes.
So perfect. We'll share a link to the poster as well. But thank you so much for coming on Run Chat.
Okay.
Thank you.
So much.